what's good? It's Andrew from travelingguitarist.com. Today I'm talking to you guys about guitar overdrive pedals. What is it? What is an overdriven signal? And some of the differences between overdrive and distortion, as well as clipping. I'm going to touch on that as well. So essentially a guitar overdrive pedal, it's a device that pushes the guitar signal to the point of distortion. So it's also called soft clipping or overdrive, and it's achieved by inserting clipping diodes in the feedback loop of an audio device, which is basically another word or another way of explaining that there's little things put into the device that causes it to clip naturally or by default, and it mimics an overdriven amplifier without actually increasing the volume of your amp. So overdrive has been around forever, pretty much since the beginning of tube amplifiers. And what that means is that back in the day, people would, when they first started playing tube amps, they would play it, someone eventually would play the amp so loud that it would actually overdrive, which means that the signal would get too hot, it would get too loud and powerful for the device to handle, and it would crackle and make that sound. And that's essentially what overdrive is. That's why they call it overdrive, because the signal's literally been overdriven. So an overdrive pedal just mimics that. It imitates that overdriven signal, and it puts that onto your sound. That way you don't actually have to crank your amp if you don't want to. So as I say in the article, the most common one is the TS808 tube screamer, which you can see on Amazon here. It's this one right here. That's the most common one for sure. But anyway, there's a little bit of confusion on this topic for a couple of reasons. Notably that some of the terms that we use are interchangeable, although each term connotates a slight difference and it's used in a different context. So for example, overdrive, also called soft clipping, it's when this audio signal has been pushed only slightly above the threshold of the device. Whereas distortion, it's kind of like the same thing, but it's been pushed much harder. So the distortion, it's been pushed much harder, although technically, overdrive and distortion are kind of like the same thing, because distortion is a consequence of overdrive. However, distortion, we usually refer to that when the overdrive is a lot more. Like if you think of a distortion pedal, like there's a lot more grit to it. There's a lot more distortion. Whereas overdrive is just like light distortion. And also, this is kind of like clipping too. Like clipping causes distortion as well. Like clipping is essentially what happens when the signal hits the ceiling or the threshold of the audio device. So clipping and distortion and overdrive are kind of like the same thing, but they're slightly different. Like clipping more refers to the act of when the audio signal gets to the top of the ceiling, like what you can see here. This is the audio signal, this is the ceiling of the device, and this is the clipping. So normally the wave, the sine wave, the sound wave, it would oscillate naturally, as this thing shows here, this image here. But it clips, like it literally gets clipped off, like cut off literally. And that's why it's called clipping, because it's no longer allowed to oscillate naturally. And that's what it makes that distorted clipping sound, or that overdrive sound. So this is what it would look like if it wasn't clipping. Like this signal is just free. It's free to do its thing. It's not hitting the ceiling at all, so there's no distortion on that. You may be asking like, well, what's the difference between overdrive and distortion? Well, as I just said, overdrive is kind of just like soft clipping, whereas distortion is hard clipping. And distortion is used normally for heavy metal, rock, stuff like that. Whereas overdrive, you can use that maybe in blues and other genres, although you can use it in any genre as well. But it's usually just referring to like the amount that's being used. But anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope this helped illustrate some of these differences to you. Make sure you like and subscribe, and then I'll see you guys in the next video, all right? See you later.